Hey, Satanico here, once again for God Loves Comics and a very small haul, or comics unboxing, even though none of these are really in a box. I've got three small packages here, actually very small packages, and one I've already opened. I filmed a comics haul. I didn't really like what I did, so I decided just to bundle it with the other two packages because they only have a few comics each, and we'll start with this right here. This is Batman Family number 17. Now, I purchased 4 Batman families from a small lot. The seller was asking $20, and but he had a best offer, so I offered him $15 because the shipping was already almost $5. So he accepted it, and so I got these 4 dollar issues of Batman Family for $20, which included shipping. So that's actually a really good buy. These aren't incredibly in demand, but you're talking an 80-page comic. It only costs $1, and all new material, no reprints. And I bought these all specifically because they have they have very good artists throughout, at least specifically the cover artists. This one is Michael W. Kaluta, always a great artist. I love this cover. It's a really nice cover. I love the way Batgirl looks. Robin looks a bit like a psycho. And favorite, Man-Bat. What the hell is going on here? That's what's going on in his mind, apparently. He looks like he has no clue why he's here, what he's doing. I don't know, like he maybe ingested some magic mushrooms, who knows. But anyway, great cover by Michael Kaluta. And as I was saying, I purchased all 4 of these comics because they all have Michael Golden art. And of all the Bronze Age artists I sort of remember very fondly, I think Golden, who was never really a stable, on a book for very long, with the exception of Micronauts, is one that I still always sort of want to see his work. And I didn't buy the DC work for the most part, just because I didn't see it. So when I get a chance to pick some up and it occurs to me, I do so. So that's this is Michael Golden. In this particular issue, which is pretty cool. Okay, Poison Ivy appearance, Man-Bat, and the Demon battle Morgan Le Fay. So that sounds interesting. And the script is by Bob Razakis, the Answer Man. The artist by Michael Golden, who draws himself as a security guard in the story. So we'll crack that open and maybe take a look. Cameos by Batman, Batgirl, and the Huntress. Letter to the editor from Mike Taifenbacher. I don't know, who cares. First page illustration by Jim Starlin and a Michael Kaluta cover. So that's pretty cool. And let's take a quick look at first we'll look at the Starlin illustration. It's just one page. It's a little bit of a poem. You can see a signature there in the bottom right-hand corner. Pretty nice. Jim Starlin was doing some really good work on Batman at this point. Just occasionally, but he was popping up. And then, see, just classic Michael Golden. This actually looks somewhat like his stuff that he did for Miracle Man, which I really liked. Michael Golden and Marshall Rogers did some work on Miracle Man long after Kirby had departed. And this is a case where Golden inked himself, which is always really cool. And then he has a pretty big shot inker on a couple of the next books as well. And that must be the security guard. That's Michael Golden. Even though the Michael Golden these days is more of a blonde, but so pretty cool. He put himself in the book. And beautifully drawn. Really happy to see Golden's work. His Man-Bat looks amazing. His baby looks amazing. and the demon looks amazing. So, Yarva Demonicus Etrigan. I summon the demon Etrigan. And if you're following at all my Swamp Thing readings, Etrigan played a pretty considerable part, especially in the earlier issues in the 20s, as written by Alan Moore. And Alan Moore did a fantastic job, as he does always, with really breathing life into Etrigan, making him so much more unique than typically is in the hands of other writers, including, sadly, Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby is a great artist, not always the greatest writer. And this is Batman Family number 18. And this is a Jim Starlin cover. Man Bat again. If you remember also my last comics haul, which was Detective Comics with mostly Neil Adams covers and art, and a lot of Man Bat. I don't know. I do like the character. I never followed it, back in when I was actually reading mainstream comics, but it's pretty entertaining. And anyway, this is number 18. So this has pencils by Michael Golden and inks by P. Craig Russell. So that's a superstar inker, superstar art team. And then it has also a script by Paul Levitz and pencils by Joe Staton and Bob Layton. I always like Bob Layton's inks, even though Bob Layton is also an excellent penciler. And then you've got a Jim Starlin cover. And of course, there are some other stories in here as well. I think Juan Ortiz. I'm not familiar with him, but I saw the name listed. And then there is number 19. And these actually are all supposed to be in very good to fine, and they certainly fit that bill. There are certainly some issues here. There's a little tiny dent there. There's a little tiny corner crease at the bottom right-hand corner, tiny top, but actually very nice. Actually, these do look like fine. They're mostly in the 5, maybe 5.5 range. It's hard to, the ones in the bags, obviously, are going to look a little bit better. But this, again, I believe is another Michael Kaluta cover. Great cover again. They reused the sort of Man Bat's face and the Huntress face from before. Great cover, White Bat, White Death. And this has a script by Denny O'Neil, pencils by Michael Golden, inks again by Craig Russell. And again, another story as well, the Huntress story, with a script by Paul Levitz, Joe Staton, and Bob Layton again, and Michael Kaluta cover. So, when you're talking about Michael Kaluta, Craig Russell, and Michael Golden, you're talking 3 really big stars from the Bronze Age who did pretty eclectic work and were never really heavily associated with any one title, and yet still stood out enough to make names for themselves. And this is the last one. This is number 20, and this is Jim Starlin. Right, there's his name right there. And this is actually a wraparound cover. So you've got Ragman. This is also a pretty cool villain. And there's the wraparound. And the back looks just as good as the front. The great image of Man Bat, Batgirl. There's the full wraparound right there. Nice. It's got some creases, it's got some dings a little bit, some ticks along the spine, but otherwise, and it's got a little bit of damage up to the top here. But actually, cover gloss. It's got a little crease on the corner, but cover gloss, and the cover is actually in really nice condition. Overall, it looks like a fine to me. Maybe I'm too lenient, but it's certainly better than very good. So I think it is a legit fine. And this also has, once again, this is a script by David V. Reed. Not too familiar with his work. Pencils by Michael Golden. Inks by Bob Smith. Bob Smith's kind of one of the old-timers. I'm most familiar with him from, I think, The Champions, Marvel's The Champions. I don't know how well his inks will gel with Michael Golden's work. I would think Craig Russell would be a lot more sensitive and sort of elegant in terms of his inks, but it might be okay. And then you've got a script by Bob Rozakis, again, The Answer Man. Pencils by Don Heck. And inks by John Solardo. Appearances by The Elongated Man, Red Tornado, Man Bat Stars, and a script by Rozakis. Pencils by Golden. Inks by Joe Rubenstein. Okay, and The Huntress in Trial by Fire. Script by Paul Levitz. Pencils by Joe Staten, Bob Layton. Jim Starlin wraparound cover. So this actually has two Michael Golden stories by two kind of, well, I mean, Bob Smith was better known maybe as a penciler. Joe Rubenstein was very well known as an inker, and I always liked his work. I think it'll be interesting maybe to see the difference in styles, but either way, I'm seeing that Michael Golden still looks like Michael Golden. This is the Joe Rubenstein. I always liked his work a lot, and he's still very active on Facebook. See him on there every now and then. Facebook comics groups. Really nice guy. And typically beautiful work from Golden. One of the first mainstream comics artists to really sort of adapt a manga and anime affectations, but very successfully without really going over the top, not in the bug-eyed sort of manner, sort of just the overall sort of facial features and just sort of very organic manga influence. Although, of course, manga can be in an infinite number of styles, just like American comics, but I think people know what I mean. And then, okay, this is probably a Don Heck story. This is a bit clunkier, but interesting nonetheless. Indeed, it is Don Heck and John Solardo. And then this is Golden again with the Ragman. And you can still see Golden's, his very expressive faces, his figure work. But Bob Smith is a little more heavy-handed. It still looks beautiful. And he still did a very nice job. So, yeah. Nice. So I'm very happy with these. Maybe at the end of this, I'll look at the other one to see P. Craig Russell's inks. But very happy with that order. And next up, just got this one package here. And this is actually, it just came in a yellow envelope, but that's fine because it is sandwiched pretty nicely between very stiff cardboard. And this is only one issue. And our one comic. I'm going to have to cut this tape. One comic, and the only hint is that it's not superheroes. It's not really an indie comic. It's just of a genre that I've gained a much greater appreciation of that I would have never been interested in growing up. But it's a genre that has a lot of really good artists who migrated to superheroes eventually. That may give you a pretty good hint. And in this case, there's really only one artist, and it was really just a cover. And I overpaid, I think. I mean, it's certainly worth it. I've seen that these comics are actually very pricey. So he sandwiched it between two pieces of cardboard, which is well secured, and then wrapped very carefully in this newspaper. So rip that open. And let's see what the condition is. not what you expected, perhaps. It's Love Stories, number 150. But what a great cover, and that is by J. Scott Pike, one of the premier sort of romance comics artists from that era, who really moved out of that into drawing erotica and a lot of illustration work and more fine arts as he got out of comics. And but he was one of the premier romance comics cover artists. He also created the character of Dolphin, which would eventually emerge in Aquaman. And you know, of course, a lot of other great artists worked in DC and in Marvel romance comics division, including John Romita, Vince Colletta, famous for his Jack Kirby inks, actually does ink a story in here that's drawn by Art Saf. But the interior art is, we'll take a look at that in a minute, but the interior art is not as great. There are no really great artists in here. The problem was I was going to actually pick up several more of these, but the dealer listed all of the titles to end at the exact same moment. So while I was bidding on this one, and a little bit of a bidding war, all of the other titles ended. I really wanted one with a great John Romita cover. There were a couple others with J. Scott Pike, and there were a couple others with some I'm sure there were some more Don Heck as well, even though that's not really what I was looking for. But unfortunately, this was the only one, and this one actually cost me $13, so it wasn't cheap, especially for just one comic. But I found out that many of these love stories, this is not in the greatest condition. It's certainly a very good. It's not nearly as good a condition as any of these Batman families, I think, because I think it has a water stain on the back. Maybe it has a little water damage there, just by rippling. Still looks nice in the bag, and still a nice cover, but in retrospect I probably overpaid for this one, whereas this Batman family collection was this is probably about $40 if you were to retail these each very conservatively, and I paid half that, so I think I get a good deal on that. And there are actually still quite a lot of Michael Golden fans out there who would love to have that. And then this one came in proper Gemini or Gem mailer, which are very, very solid. Almost never have any problems with those. Always a good, and always good to get those, because if I sell some comics, I can obviously pop them right back in the same packaging and sell these. But this is 4 issues of a 6-issue miniseries, kind of a classic from 1983. I'm going to read a little bit about this in a minute. He only had 4. They looked like they were listed in Near Mint, and they actually looked like it. And this series is from 1983, so anytime you get Near Mint, it's quite good. But the collectability of these, in terms of the monetary value, not very much. For whatever reason, not very much. It's not really about the money here. It's just about the books themselves. And I may actually do a reading of the series, which I think would be pretty interesting. I haven't seen it in a long time. They do have collections out now, of course, as they do with everything. But it is... Slide these to the side. Frank Miller's Ronin. Speaking of manga influences, this definitely has those, but it's from a different school. You know, Michael Golden is it's a different manga style. This is much more the gritty, the grittier sort of style that was. I think Kojima was the artist, but it was heavily influenced, of course, by Kaz Koike and I think Kojima's Lone Wolf and Cub. At a time when, once again, where most American comics artists were not following that sort of stuff, or certainly not into it enough to have been influenced and to have let it affect their work, Frank Miller kind of stepped forward and really got heavily influenced by it, and stepped away from sort of the stuff they was doing on Daredevil for Marvel. I love this cover. I particularly like the colors And the colors are by Lynn Varley, who I think was Frank Miller's wife. I think no longer his wife, but they had a very fruitful relationship, particularly creatively. Beautiful, beautiful coloring. The covers are beautiful, and it really is a lot to do with the cover, with the coloring, and that is book 4. So those are really nice. You may take a look at those. But let's take a brief look at what has been said about Ronan. I mean, obviously, as I said, Ronan was heavily influenced by Kaz Koike and Lone Wolf and Cub. Kaz Koike just died a couple of months ago. He drew, he actually was primarily a writer. I don't think he was an artist. He collaborated with a lot of artists. And some of the stuff that he wrote, even though he's widely admired in the U.S. for Lone Wolf and Cub, and primarily associated with Frank Miller's influence for that. He wrote some insane stuff, and to understand it, you probably have to listen to something like the Anime World Order podcast, which is really fantastic. But whenever they talk about Kaz Koike and some of the stuff that he wrote and created, it is insane. It is bonkers. It is very explicit, violent, sexual, to a degree that Frank Miller looks absolutely like a choir boy. No comparison. And in fact, most American artists, particularly in the mainstream, there's no comparison, which is not to say that it's better or that it's good. It's just to say that it is batshit crazy. So, and then obviously Mobius is another influence. And I took some, I looked at one great review from Kim Thompson, the late Kim Thompson, who I had many, many vicious verbal battles with on the late great Comics Journal forums. But still, you know, I was very sad to hear that Kim had passed away from, apparently from cancer a few years back. But he wrote a very good and rather blistering review, even though it kind of came around where he actually said some approving things of Ronan. But going over, first of all, the Mobius influence, which I think you can see it particularly like right here. And then, you know, simply because you're looking at Samurai, this seems to be more manga influenced. But there are elements of Mobius. Well, he says it's Mobius. Not Mobius inspired or Mobius derived, but Mobius, period. Miller has told me in personal conversation that he realizes he allowed Mobius style to take over completely in the first issue and hopes to fix this in future issues. I certainly hope so, for the duplication is astonishing. So this is book 1, and I'll crack that open while I continue to read. We'll take a look at the Mobius influence. Actually, let's do that right now. And the artwork actually, yeah, there you go. I mean, there's some stuff here that definitely looks very Mobius inspired. As even Kim Thompson, in his definite critique, and that looks a lot like something, that looks like, certainly looks like something you would see from Mobius, but also reminds me a little bit of something that you might see in Akira. This, of course, was Katsuhiro Otomo's epic, but artistically, it's still very arresting, shall we say, and the colors are beautifully done. But you can certainly see the Mobius influence, and according to Kim Thompson, Frank Miller admitted not only that it was influence or inspire, but it was far too heavily so, and he was trying to work away from that. But at least if you're going to be inspired by someone, you can do far worse than looking at Mobius. Even though Frank Miller is not remotely the draftsman that Mobius was. Mobius was just an innate genius when it came to his draftsmanship and made it look so easy. And Frank Miller's never been the best at anatomy, even though looking at this artwork, it looks Really nice. It's really beautiful. I haven't seen it in quite a while. I don't actually remember finishing reading the series for whatever reason. I think I just wasn't able to find all of the books, because that was back in the day. And continuing on with what Kim had to say, the artwork is thoughtfully designed and meticulously executed, and virtually none of it is any good. After I just said that it looks pretty good. Miller still draws the human body very badly, as stated. His characters never balance or move correctly. Now, in a book that is mostly composed of fight scenes, it would seem quite a liability to have an artist who doesn't draw action well. In a sense, though, Miller doesn't draw action at all. I had begun to notice this in Daredevil, and it is even truer of Ronin. Miller's panels, individually, are usually immobile. They display people posing before and after the action. Every movement happens between the panels. Significantly, the few panels where the characters actually do move are among the worst constructed and least convincing. Ouch. So this is book 3. And this looks strangely sort of like the 2-page spread we saw before, but obviously different slightly, but the composition looks very similar. And a lot of this looks very similar also to Lone Wolf and Cub, and also reminds me a little bit of Blade of the Immortal. Then you see sort of the panel construction that you would see in The Dark Knight Returns. All of the very small panels, multiple panels that almost look like television sets. I actually quite like the art. I think it's some of his better work ever. Certainly better than a lot of stuff that I saw in Daredevil. But Kim may have a point in stating that the art is very static in a sense. And I had never noticed that Frank Miller was so bad at action. There are many panels in many pages in Daredevil where there are multiple figures of Daredevil tumbling and running and kicking and things, but I would have to look at them again to be refreshed as to whether they still look static and whether they're just clever sort of adaptations to covering his inability to draw action, if that's the case. Colors and page layouts, and there's a little bit of Sin City noirish silhouette. It would develop, not a style I like once it became Sin City, because it was just too much. In this context, it looks amazing. But carrying on, Kim also said, finally, more positive, my reaction to the storyline is ultimately this. It's a clever, if derivative, conceit, and it kept me turning the pages, but cleverness is shallow, and I don't trust Ronin to deliver anything deeper. I think that the first issue gives away Miller's aims, if not his actual way of executing them. Ronin is a gorgeous package, produced and controlled by a single creator, and that it is a step in the right direction for American comics. Ronin will teach the mainstream companies that they can make a huge amount of money without stealing their creators' ideas, saddling them with unsympathetic and reactionary editors, and printing the material on toilet paper. Miller deserves credit for using his clout to effect this kind of change, and he deserves credit for trying to do something different. I just wish I thought it was any good. So, not quite faint praise, but, rather bittersweet, to say the least. But I still may do a reading of these, and it may be a lot easier to read these than it would be to read Swamp Thing, because there's a lot less dialogue and a lot of imagery, which people like. You've already seen these, but still pretty nice. So that is the selection. Let's take a quick look in a very different context at love stories. I'm already up to 30 minutes. I try to go as fast as possible, and still up to 30 minutes. On the plus side, I did almost 25 minutes when I just did the initial thing on Batman Family. I realized that was too long, so. But you can see right there, there's a signature, Artie and Vinny, so that's Art Saf and Vinny Coletta. But the figure drawing is pretty awkward, but pretty funny. Some of these individual panels that you see in these romance comics, particularly, you know, I see these online when I'm looking, are usually pretty amusing and tell you a lot about how comics sort of viewed the dynamics between the male and female dynamics. She was not into this guy, and by the end she's kissing him and making out, and they seem pretty happy. Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but whatever. And actually the art is pretty, you know, it's kind of that bland art that you would expect in a very sort of mediocre 70s mainstream comic, but not bad. I remember seeing this cover now. This is great. The guy who fell in love with a nun. Or the nun who fell in love with him. And it's always hard to find these actually in good condition. Kind of surprising in a way, because you gotta figure that most of them were owned by girls, and you would think the girls would take better care. There's the water stain, but at the same time, it also sort of makes sense because girls were buying these comics and reading them, and they were actually reading them, and then they were just tossing them in a pile. And they weren't really paying much attention to them because they weren't collectors. They weren't trying to bag and board them, even though bagging and boarding was less prevalent, certainly even in this era. And this isn't that long ago, but in the 20-cent era. So, really quickly, take one quick look, because I haven't even seen, of the well, if I could open this bag, of the Michael Golden being inked by Craig Russell, and we'll call it a day. Thanks for sticking around if you're actually watching this. If you're fast forwarding, that's perfectly fine. This is actually in a lot better condition than I thought, even outside the bag. Actually very nice. It's actually pretty, certainly looks like in the 6 to 6.5. And the page quality is actually really nice. And beautiful artwork again by Golden. He draws a really noble, exceptional Batman, right up there with Neil Adams, Don Newton, and yet more expressive than you would typically see from a lot of lesser artists. So Michael Golden does not disappoint. His reputation is well earned. Beautiful work, beautiful. And this is inked by P. Craig Russell. Even though I think he was just Craig Russell at this point, he wasn't the P. Who famously did Sandman 50, and he also did. He's done a lot of other stuff, of course. He also worked on like Kill Raven way back when. You see Craig Russell's inks, but I also have like the Poems of Oscar Wilde, a hardcover that he did for MBM, which is also beautifully drawn. One of the great sort of elegant artists ever to come in comics. And this is what I like about this also is this is substantial. This is like 20 pages of Michael Golden art. So it's not just a typical like 6-pager, 8-pager. So it's almost like a full-length. It is a full-length comic. And then you still have 80 pages, so you still have 60 more pages of slightly more pedestrian art, but still satisfying. This is Juan Ortiz and Vince Coletta, and I think it ends with Joe Staton. Actually, nice art there. The Hunters. Joe Staton and Bob Layton. Bob Layton Joe Staton always has a somewhat cartoony style, and Bob Layton has a little slicker, more modernized style, and actually gels pretty well. So there you go. So that's it. We've got very, very different comics. You get a romance, you get 4 Batman families, all with Michael Golden, and then of course you get Frank Miller when he was sort of breaking out of the mold, before he kind of went nuts. And that's the collection. That's the haul this time. So thanks for watching, and I'll be back sometime soon with another one and continue on. I'm on the last legs of the Swamp Thing reading. I only have 2 more issues to go. So if you haven't listened to that, maybe go back and listen to the anatomy lesson. It was fantastic. It's the very first episode that Alan Moore did one issue right before the anatomy lesson, and then he took over, and it was fantastic. So that's it. Thanks very much for listening, and see you next time. Bye-bye.